Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Wherever you're joining in from, hello. Thank you so much for making an effort to be here and committing part of your day to learning. I promise to make this next half hour very worth your time. Here's our agenda for today. We'll start super broadly. I want to talk to you about how you can build or revamp your recruiting pipeline using a simple three-step approach and some knowledge about the average student. Then we'll dig in a little deeper into UW student trends specifically and how you can stand out to Huskies by building a brand that'll speak to what they want specifically. Lastly, we'll talk through recruitment timelines. Whether you have non-traditional recruiting timelines or one that's fairly standard for your industry, we'll talk through student activity, and I'll give you some recommendations about when and how to begin your outreach. By way of introduction, before I jump into content, hello, my name's Leah. If this is your first contact with the CNIC, we are so glad you're here. We're the centralized career center on campus, and we provide career guidance to students of almost all majors and school years. Everyone in our office works to connect students with a different resource or audience. We do everything from review students' resumes to connect them with mentors, and I work to get students in touch with employers like you. So my role is focused mostly around outreach and event coordination, really any opportunity where employers and students can connect. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. Here's where we begin. This part of the presentation is meant to help focus the energy and vision you have for recruiting this year. If you've never formally built a recruiting pipeline, or you have a strategy, but you're listening to this webinar to think about how you can revamp it, this section of the presentation is going to outline how I'd tell you to approach connecting with students in the 2024-2025 school year. Step 1, make your content stand out. Before a new hire is even a twinkle in your eye, you're going to have to attract the right candidate. This is going to require you to sit down and consider your open roles, your entire company really, through the lens of a student. And what you come up with is going to create the foundation upon which you market your company. So you have two main questions to think through. The first is, what do students expect of me? And the keyword that comes to my mind is responsibility. We're learning that students feel very responsible to make the most of their education and the money they pay and the effort they exert to go to class, participate in career readiness and extracurriculars, and generally make the most of their time here at UW. And they expect the same of employers. They want to know that employers are committing to the things they care about. We're going to talk specifically about what students care about in a little bit, but in general, as we talk today about recruitment here at UW, and you think about what you'd like to take away, I would keep the word responsibility in mind. How can you communicate to this class of students that you're committing to them? And this is going to affect how you communicate things like your benefits policies or how you write about your company mission. And the second question follows suit. What do you expect from students? This affects how you tailor your list of responsibilities or your list of minimum requirements. What I'd encourage you to think about here is that we're learning that students want specificity just as much as they want equality. And here's what I mean by this. Last year in 2023, I spent a lot of time talking to employers about access to jobs, and I encouraged them to think critically about job requirements. So, like, does your job really necessitate 3 years of experience? Does it really require a degree in marketing, or would a bachelor's degree suffice? So I think job descriptions opened up a little bit in the last year. But the catch-22 for students is that if jobs really are open, then they risk feeling vague to students. So you might mitigate this by having a section on recommended background or something similar, so as to say, a degree in this major field isn't necessary, but if you're wondering if you fit the bill, here's some guidance on the types of major paths that are relevant to this field. So just to illustrate what I talked about, here's a sample job posting from our center. The department description and the diversity statement should speak to students. This is how students are going to glean information about your mission and decide if you're a good place to work or a good fit for them. The position purpose, position responsibilities, and qualifications sections should set reliable expectations and help the right candidates get in touch with you. So we've got the message, now let's make it student-facing. Step 2, make your presence stand out. And I actually have 2 slides for this step, divvied up to focus on online and offline efforts. So we'll start with online efforts first. I think a common mistake recruiters often make is forgetting to optimize their recruiting efforts for the platform. Not all websites are created equal. I put some helpful tips in here to help you focus your efforts. We'll start with Handshake. As an early adopter of the Handshake platform, UW pushes this to all our students, and we truly believe that it's the best way that you can get in touch with most student populations. And I want to asterisk that, though, by asserting that medical, rehabilitation, behavioral health, and education majors are usually not present on these platforms. So if you are heavily targeting students on those degree paths, stand by for some other tips in a second. For most other industries, though, Handshake really is the place to be, and we love it because it's not only a great place to post jobs, but it's also a great way to participate in or host events. It's really a catch-all for all things recruiting. But we can't forget about LinkedIn, the original Handshake. This is also a great way to get in touch with students, and I'll be the first to admit that it really is the most legitimate professional networking program. LinkedIn doesn't have as many capabilities. You can't host a virtual info session on LinkedIn, for example, but it's also a lot less noisy. Handshake's new social media platform has introduced a layer of clutter that most students won't sift through in the same way that they'd scroll through LinkedIn. So use the platform to your advantage by networking here. I wanted to call out campus-specific job boards. This is a really good way to reach all the industries I listed earlier that you can't really recruit on Handshake, medical, rehab, etc. But it's also a good way to reach pretty much any student population. So for example, if you're in the social work realm, you could go to Google, type in UW School of Social Work, find the contact page, and send an email. These schools know the best way to reach their students, and you can certainly gain some great exposure that way. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention social media when talking about online presence. Social media is interesting. It was long touted as the place to be for any employer who wanted to give themselves a personality. But now social media is filled with personalities, and it's really hard to stand out among the noise. In a world where videos are 10 seconds long, we're dealing with short attention spans and quick bursts of dopamine. So whatever you create has to feed that. I would not recommend getting involved in TikTok or Instagram for any company that cannot devote the energy and creativity that those platforms demand. And I said I had 2 slides for this step. This slide focuses on all the offline stuff because remember, student-facing messaging applies to all the times you're actually talking face-to-face with students. Here are some ways that you can get in front of Huskies physically based off of what we offer here on campus on a regular basis. These are opportunities like career fairs, for one. We offer these through our center, the CNIC, 8 per year, open to basically all majors, though the ones that you see listed here are the ones most likely to attend. So engineering, business, arts, media, and government and policy. Some schools, have their own career centers, and they'll host their own niche ones for their students throughout the year as well. So engineering students can attend fairs hosted by our center, but the Career Center at Engineering or the Allen School of Engineering's Career Center will also host their own niche fairs. If you're attending career fairs as an employer, my best tip for you is to know who's most likely to attend. And as a secondary tip, be intentional about who you bring to talk about your open roles. Huskies love Huskies, so alumni are a great choice. But above all, as I mentioned earlier, Huskies depend on you to set good expectations. And they want to talk to somebody who knows what they'll be doing in a potential role more than anything. So if it's possible for your recruiting team, bring someone who performs the role you're hiring for to really stand out among other employers at these events. There's more opportunity in in-person info sessions. Employers with established reputations or with positive social reputations tend to see the best attendance. And this is a deviation from previous years where really only big Seattle names stood a chance of drawing a crowd. Now we find that students are willing to make time for in-person info sessions if they perceive the attending company to be a good place to work. Virtual info sessions are another great way to get roles in front of Huskies, but caution, you're going to need to get creative with things like your info session name, description, or your hosts in order to drive attendance. Anyone can host a virtual info session for free, so students' handshake feeds are saturated. Remember this when you're drawing up your event schedule. You can only stand out if you're willing to put in the work. And lastly, the final way to stand out is to host your own event. Remember that you can reach out to the student populations that align with your industry, and you can do this in a couple of different ways. I've already talked about contacting departments or schools that house the majors that align with your role, but you could also reach out to RSOs or registered student organizations to do the same thing. So going back to my original example, say you wanted to reach social workers. Well, you can reach out to the School of Social Work, as I discussed earlier, and then you can hop on the RSO directory and contact the Organization of Student Social Workers, or the School of Social Work Disability Justice Collective, or the UW Career chapter, just to name a few. This slide really encapsulates a lot of the ways that UW makes it easy for you to get in front of Huskies. But remember, you can come up with your own recruiting tactics as well. For example, UW offers interview rooms. You don't have to use these to conduct interviews, though. You could book one or two, and you could use them to host office hours or coffee chats with students and give them a one-on-one networking opportunity, something that so many Huskies have voiced their appreciation for. And if you have your own idea, we would love to hear from you. Things like site visits, small group coaching sessions, or competitions are all things that students love, but they are intensely difficult for us here at the center to recruit for. So if you come to us to let us know that you want to do something like this, we would be so happy to try to make it come to life. And as the final third step in my three-step approach, make your follow-up stand out. I recently surveyed a group of students to ask them what they wanted from recruiters, and this was by far students' most requested action item. At the time I'm filming this, the job market has not been easy for anyone, including students, and it's altogether too common for students to be on the receiving end of a ghost from recruiters. So the best way you can stand out is to be an eager recruiter. In a world where it feels like so few companies want to make a hire, students are really attracted to the idea of someone wanting them. So I've divvied this slide up into two categories based on how the contact was established. So if the contact was made online, I'm guessing it was by you, the organization. Maybe you have a practice established already of sending cold DMs on Handshake or LinkedIn. So here are my tips for you. Make sure the message is very tailored. It should have their name. It should include a line as to why you're reaching out. It should reference something from their profile, and it should include a clear next step. Most importantly, don't forget to keep the conversation going if or when a student replies. It seems so easy, but students say it's not unusual to reply back with a question and receive nothing in return. So if you're going through the trouble of finding a student profile and then tailoring and then sending a message, continue going through the trouble of maintaining the contact. You really can stand out to a student this way. The other way contact can be established is offline, usually at an event, and therefore triggered by the student. So the student attends an event you're at, they approach your booth, they come to shake your hand, they participate in your Q&A, whatever. To stand out to students here, the best advice I can give you is to make their attendance worth their while. Students are likely attending your event because they want a job, and you can reward them for their extra effort by doing something you can't do for any other candidate who's just applying online. Maybe that's by collecting their resumes and sending each attendee a follow-up email, or maybe it's inviting them to a coffee chat the next day. No matter how you choose to do it, I just encourage you to remember that the recruiting doesn't end after the event is over. Keep the momentum going by keeping up with your interested candidates. Let's segue into Huskies specifically and run through some stats and offerings that are specific to the University of Washington. The more you know about your audience, the better you can engage them. Quick stats on the UW tri-campus populations. We're a system of 3 schools with our Seattle campus as our largest at just over 50,000 students enrolled. Bothell and Tacoma each sit around 5,000 students enrolled. I wanted to bring this up purely to put Handshake into perspective and remind you of just how much reach you have by getting involved here. So UW Nuance, Seattle, and Bothell share a Handshake account. Tacoma has its own instance. So by being connected to Seattle and Bothell on Handshake, you have the capacity to get your roles in front of nearly 56,000 students. And by being connected to Tacoma on Handshake, you can add 5,000 more to your overall reach. And it's free. Now, it cannot be disputed that UW's student population is increasingly made up of Gen Zers. And for a more in-depth look into Gen Z values in the workplace, I'm going to point you to the In My Gen Z Era webinar on our website, careers.uw.edu. But I did want to summarize some information here because when we talk about Husky behavior, we automatically have to talk about Gen Z because most of our campus is Gen Z. And this is diversifying our student population in dramatic ways. 2 years ago, we welcomed in UW's most diverse freshman class ever, seeing record numbers of underrepresented minority students, transfer students, and international students. Which means that anytime you interact with a Husky, you're likely to be interacting with a member of one of these populations. And that might mean they don't speak English as a first language. They might be interested in your diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, and if you're approaching DEI work at all. They may have never had an internship before, or they may be wondering if you hire international students. What I really want you to walk away understanding from this section is that students are bringing new perspectives and needs to campus, and that's changing how campus systems respond to them. And all students go to college to get jobs, right? So the college experience is very much linked to job experiences, and we have to think tangentially about this. The values that students bring to college is going to affect how campus responds to them, and therefore how campus shares information with you, the employer, and therefore how you, the employer, come to campus and interact with our students, and therefore how students react with you, right? It's all a big ecosystem of influence with students at the helm. Huskies are highly academically motivated. UW is very proud to be one of the best universities in the world, ranked sixth globally and second among US public institutions, with many initiatives in race and equity, population health, and entrepreneurship. Students who attend the University of Washington care about doing good and achieving success. And this is on top of the thing that Gen Z in general cares about. I promised you a list earlier in this slide deck, and here it is. These are some of the things that Gen Z cares most about in regards to hiring. We talked a bit already about relevant education and experience criteria. Gen Z, again, really wants to know what you expect of them. Gen Z cares about your benefits policies, particularly as it relates to their work-life balance. They care about flexible working policies, mental health support, and PTO. Gen Z cares about salary transparency. They want to know how much they'll make, and as a fiscally prudent generation, they also want to know if they'll have opportunities to advance to earn more throughout their career. Gen Z cares a lot about social impact. They want to work for a company that does purposeful work or will allow them to do good as an employee of your organization. And they care about your diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. They want to work for a diverse leadership alongside diverse individuals who care about uplifting diverse populations. As an additional layer, we cannot gloss over UW's location and how Huskies' time here in Seattle will shape the way that they think about the workforce and their future careers. Students are going to care a lot about these three factors: salary, commitment to social impact, and remote work options. Starting with the first, salary. Whether you're tuning in from somewhere in Washington or an entirely different state, I don't need to tell you that there's a reputation about this city that it's expensive to live here. Indeed, off-campus housing for students in the university district can cost students over $1,000 a month in rent. I shuddered when I heard that. I paid $425 for my apartment in Wisconsin in 2013, and I thought that was a lot. Many students will be entering the workforce with tremendous student loan debt. Many established families here in Seattle earn too much to qualify for financial aid on paper, but the high cost of living in the city doesn't allow them to fully fund their child's education, which prompts many students to take out loans. Post-graduation, students might plan to stay here, again, one of the most expensive cities in the US, so we know money's on their mind. And finally, to round out compensation talk, UW is a highly prestigious university. And I would imagine that that comes into play for students when they think about their degree and why they went to college in the first place. Many of them chose to come here because of our credentials, believing that it would likely earn them a well-paying job in a high-achieving industry. And we have to acknowledge some students' belief that their status as a Husky should allow them more. But it's not all about money, so flipping the switch here, I want to stress that Gen Z Huskies are going to care perhaps a little more than the average bear about social impact. Because many of them grew up here in Washington, and even our out-of-state Huskies are here for 2 to 4 years, and because when you live in Washington, you can't not care about social impact because you see affected persons or are required to follow certain laws every day. I'll acknowledge Seattle's housing crisis here, which has affected the city for decades. And I'll also add a shout out to Washington's sustainability laws. As an out-of-stater myself, I was blown away when I moved here that there were compost bins on campus, or I had to pay a sugar tax if I wanted a regular Sprite, or I have to pay 8 cents for a plastic bag at the grocery store if I forget my reusable ones at home. Students live in a state known for its progressive policies, and their time here is going to shape how they think about the world. And finally, Gen Z Huskies are going to care a lot about your remote work options. Post-pandemic, Seattle still ranks number 5 in the country for remote work, and students know that hybrid or remote work is possible. Knowing some of the things important to Gen Zers, and more specifically Huskies, then is going to affect how you market your company. Knowing that Huskies care a lot about social impact, you might revise your job descriptions by extrapolating upon your mission or showcasing information about your philanthropic endeavors. Knowing that Tacoma has its own instance of Handshake, you might connect with our campus there to reach more students. Knowing that UW has a high population of international students, you might prepare your recruiting team with information on your company's ability to accept CPT or OPT or sponsor student visas. Overall, I know it's not easy to tailor your recruiting efforts all the time for every platform, but hopefully this section has turned some wheels in your mind as to how you can do 1 or 2 things a little differently. Moving on to the last part of our agenda today, recruitment timelines. When do you start? What makes sense for your industry? What about the students? I'm going to run through these quarter by quarter, starting with fall. Fall quarter runs September 25th through December 6th, 2024. And you can think of October specifically as the period for STEM recruiting. As a little side anecdote, I remember my college roommate was in the School of Business for accounting. And in her senior year, she had a job lined up to start after graduation by October, right? So the shoe fits. October tends to be a great time for those on the hunt for finance, consulting, engineering, and tech positions. You may have noticed, if you are already connected with the Seattle and Bothell Handshake account, that career centers are in an absolute tizzy this time of year. Across the 2 campuses, at the time I'm filming this webinar in late September 2024, we have 20 events from now until November 14th. 20 events, and most of them are in October. So if you fit into one of these industries, students are looking now, and you need to get out there now. Winter quarter starts after the holidays. This is January 6th to March 14th, 2025. This is the primary recruiting period for summer jobs and internships for most other industries. I want to make a special call out to internships specifically because we've noticed the largest volume of internship postings on Handshake is during these months. So it's sort of a chicken and the egg cycle. Employers are doing their heaviest internship recruiting during this time, and therefore more sophomores and juniors are looking for internships during this time. Winter quarter also seems to be an active recruiting time, just given the fact that it's the turn of the new year. It's a great time for recruiters to take advantage of the new year, new me mentality when candidates start setting goals for their job search efforts or considering career changes. Historically, our center's winter career fair is our highest attended fair of the academic year. Spring quarter, March 31st to June 6th, 2025, is primarily going to be for non-technical roles. I personally was a journalism major and a philosophy major, and this is when I landed my job to start after graduation. I worked for a winery doing marketing, so again, the shoe kind of fits. This is a great time for industries listed here on the screen, as well as any catch-all roles, ones open to all majors. Spring quarter is also a great time, probably as no surprise, just to fit in that just-in-time hiring for summertime, no matter what the industry is. If you need a role filled quickly, there are a lot of students hustling and bustling for jobs during this time. And that brings us to summer quarter, June 23rd to August 22nd, 2025. There aren't going to be many roles recruiting during this time, but if you happen to be in early June still looking for candidates, our center does host the last career fair of the academic year right after spring quarter ends. We just try and fit it in before July because after that time, students usually go on vacation, either physically or mentally. Our lowest application submission month is July, so we wouldn't exactly recommend that as a great time to post. But your recruitment timeline, based on your organization's budget or fiscal year, might start as early as August, which is technically still late summer for UW. We start pretty late being on a quarter system, but it might still necessitate you getting in front of students during that time. The important thing to remember about recruiting is that it's an art, not a science. There is no exact formula, and it's heavily dependent on your company's growth patterns, budget, and current needs. This webinar was meant to help you get the conversation started with your recruiting team. And if you have any questions about how you can get involved with the Career and Internship Center and get in front of Huskies this academic year, please reach out to me. Again, my name is Leah Bothwell, and you can reach me via leahkb@uw.edu or at the center's general mailbox, cicevents@uw.edu. Have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are, and thank you so much for tuning into today's webinar. Happy recruiting, and take care.